Oh, hi there, pardon me. I'm just sorting through this thought pocket. Taking everything out, looking it over, and organizing it into something nice and cohesive. Standard internal monologue stuff. If you have the energy, I'd love your help. But of course, you can leave at any time, especially since this thought pocket deals with My Hero Academia, contains a few casual spoilers for people who aren't very far into the series. Now, let's see... This seems as good a place as any to start. So, I was watching a video by Nux Taku a few months back explaining why he didn't think Deku is a very compelling protagonist. I quickly understood that the reasons I like Deku and the reasons he didn't like Deku had exactly zero intersection, and it made me think, if what Nux and I qualify as a good character is so different, what is Horikoshi's idea of a good character? Then that chained off of me remembering Red from OSP saying, the art you make and the art other people see are not the same thing. And somewhere in this thought pocket is everything I need to reconcile those inklings together and figure out what it is about Deku and by extension all of My Hero Academia's characters that make them all so unique and interesting to talk about to me. Next bit should be... Aha! I'm sure by now everyone who cares about themes, and even a considerable amount of people who don't really, knows that the basic thematic question at the core of My Hero Academia is, what makes a hero? The funny thing I've noticed is, I don't see a lot of people consciously thinking about how central that theme is to absolutely everything, especially how the writer thinks about and structures the story and characters. Like, we all acknowledge it's there, but do we ever really stop and ask how much of the presentation of Hero Aka is affected by how clear and integral the theming is? There are infinite ways to mix and match all these ideas and characters, but he chooses this particular way of doing things that puts a whole lot of focus on these really in-your-face themes right from the word go. The first page of the manga through the USJ incident is what I identify as the beginning of My Hero Macadamia Nut, despite the entire span of time taking up all of the first season of the anime, because that's the amount of time it takes to fully establish the two most important characters, Izuku and Shigaraki. The reason I know they're the mostest importantest is that both of these boys are deeply entrenched in their narrative functions. Put a pin in that word functions. I'll really be digging into it later. They exist to oppose one another, and they exist to properly highlight those giant neon thematic questions. Because if you want to completely answer what makes a hero, you also have to answer what makes a villain. At their core, both of these characters are the answers to these questions before they are anything else, and every other character that acts in the plot is on one of their sides. It's why Gentle and Labrava feel so weird. Every other character exists to inform and support Izuku or Shigaraki and the ideals those two reflect. Gentle and Labrava just kinda happen once, then disappear. They oppose Izuku, but not because they're on Shigaraki's side. They're a strange invasive species to this narrative ecosystem that is promptly removed because they have outlived their function of adding some spice to the cultural fest arc and facilitating some minor world building to remind us that the League are not the end-all be-all of people who have fallen through the cracks in society, and there are others who react differently to similar situations. At the beginning of Hero Aka, the characters are very, very simplistic, and we don't know that much about them. Any of them, except Izuku. We know Izuku's past, his motivations for wanting to be a hero, his disposition, a few cute little personality quirks. We have everything we need about this boy. Everyone else is defined by their reactions to him when the narrative starts. Bakugo hates him. All Might wants to mentor him. Ida gains a respect for him during the test. Uraraka wants to help and be friends with him. We only get to see the pieces of everyone he comes across that pertain to him and what he is doing until we get past to the beginning. Everyone except Shigaraki. He doesn't even know Deku exists until the USJ, and he is the only character who isn't Deku that is shown as being proactive in the initial stage of the narrative. It's super important that the biggest proactive action not done by Izuku is Shigaraki's doing, because Shigaraki is incredibly detached from Izuku until they are forced to confront one another. Not only that, but they don't just clash because Shigaraki is physically attacking him and his classmates, they clash because Shigaraki existing thing attacks many of Deku's fundamental truths. Deku wants to help save everyone and stands firm through the USJ incident, but Shigaraki just wants to watch the world burn, and his entire villain monologue sounds like a lame excuse. The USJ incident leaves him frustrated and unsure. We like Deku, and so we like the people connected to him. We don't like Shigaraki and his rancid vibes, and so dislike any of his ilk. It's very simple and functional and structured, as opposed to being something more, organic and wild. I think it might be a good idea to get into something I discovered about how someone writing a story will use their characters. This is where that talk about function comes in. Let's think about the way writers use or think about their characters as a little sliding scale. On one end is characters as humans. On the opposite, we have characters as function. Someone who leans heavily towards characters as humans might write a story that places a lot of weight on the emotional, psychological, and social situations a character is in. In that more organic, wild kind of storytelling I mentioned, soap operas are probably the best example of a genre that needs a lot of characters as humans writing. The idea on this end is that a character exists for the purpose of being themselves, and whatever happens around them happens because the character needs something to act upon so the audience can see more of them while they tap or shake up the larger plot. On the characters as function side, someone would probably write a story that places a lot of weight on the state of the world or the grander objective in a narrative. When a person writes like this, they usually are trying to make their plot and themes really strong, or at least really clear and solid. Noir mysteries and really old fairy tales are usually all about characters as function. On this end, a character is made for the purpose of filling a role, which sounds vague and obvious, but what I mean is that there is a marked difference between a river and an irrigation canal, but both of them are good and important forms of water that moves. There is almost no way for a character to fall exclusively on one end of this scale. If a character is exclusively function, that is not a character. That is a plot device. If a character is just sort of there without anything to carry in the story, no matter how neat of a human they are, they're an obstruction because they need a reason to be taking up everyone's time, even if that reason is just other characters care about them and they want them near. I personally write my stories leaning heavily towards the characters as human side of things, which might be part of why I'm so terrible at coming up with conflicts. Because I'm just like, yeah, I have this character. What do you mean they need obstacles? And a world. But Horikoshi is probably the single most proficient writer for characters as function that I have ever seen. Despite the fact that no one within the fandom of My Hero Academia seems to realize that the characters are function first, and anything that makes them feel like humans is a secondary trait. Horikoshi is very good at making memorable, high-impact characters. They're each visually distinct to the point where you can see a piece of fan art, then watch the show for the first time and go, oh, it's that one! The one Glitterbomb 525 drew kissing the frog girl. And their personalities are telegraphed very well through those designs. But just because he made the characters very detailed and colorful and unique and human-like doesn't mean he's using them in the story as if they are humans before function. And the best example I can think of for that is Deku vs. Bakugo. A lot of people see this fight as a very human event, and while there's a lot of really good, really human moments, I can tell the fight is primarily function because of Bakugo and Midoriya's motivations for fighting one another. Usually when someone's writing characters as humans first and function second, the motivations are more accessible, established for longer periods of time, and explored deeper than the majority of character motivations in Hero Aka. We get to see them when Horikoshi deems it important, but they're not usually worked through during the story proper, so to speak. Instead of being gradually built up, worked through, and deeply explored, characters' motivations are given as a fact of the world, so we can appreciate and better understand why a character is doing what they're doing. It's the difference between personally guiding someone to where they need to get and giving them good directions and a reliable map. A lot of people don't seem to consciously notice that really subtle difference, and I can tell it's not conscious because I've never seen someone actively point out that Bakugo's motivation for hating Midoriya for years and his motivation to throw down at this moment are two completely separate things. Up until this point, we barely understood why Bakugo hated Midoriya so much, and there was almost no proper explanation as to why Izuku stuck so close to him through the years. Yes, we could extrapolate and theorize the why, and many people decided the why was these boys gay, which is valid, but I see no genuine romantic chemistry here, and as someone who was traumatized by years of bullying, think the people who hardcore ship Bakudeku are just a little bit concerning. But just because all the pieces for us to imagine good reasons for the characters to act this way were there, doesn't mean we explicitly had their motivations. We all accepted it because everything made sense as is. Sort of like how if you saw a leaf on the sidewalk, you would assume it fell from a tree, even if you didn't see it fall and don't know which tree it's from. Still, that literal lifelong animosity was not the reason this fight happened. It's just something we learn about during the fight. I say the personal drama was an extra ingredient and not the basis for their fight, mainly because of the context around the fight. Midoriya himself is not what makes Bakugo angry enough to want to fight him in the training ground. Bakugo was content with less formal forms of torment for years. Why start getting so serious and scheduled about it now? Midoriya hasn't dramatically changed recently in the story, and Bakugo hasn't substantially changed since the very beginning. But the state of the world has. The main adversities that these two, and by extension literally all of superhero society, face at this point are not each other. It's All Might's retirement and the appearance of the League of Villains, who, lest we forget, kind of kidnapped Bakugo like last week, that ignite a special kind of unease in Bakugo that he can't work through on his own. He fights Midoriya because he's just experienced a double whammy of personal and collective trauma, and the only way he can think of to work through these emotions is to investigate into what's going on with Deku and All Might and punch it out. The conclusion to the fight is also important context, because the resolving note that the fight ends on is a speech from All Might about what it takes to be the best hero. In the fight, they do both just want the other to get where they're coming from for once in their lives and end up working through their emotions and evolving their relationship, but if that aspect were the focal point of the fight, Horikoshi would have hammered home harder that this is the first time they've really clearly expressed how they feel about one another. Midoriya notes it at the beginning of the fight, and there are a few "I get it now" moments as they yell at each other and destroy the training ground. But someone writing this fight using a characters as humans lens would more likely have wrapped it up with them having an exhausted and complicated emotional moment where they say to one another, "I understand you, and I'm sorry that I didn't before." If the point of this fight was to show us why they act like that around one another, instead of them acting like that, being extra drama to enrich the moment, this fight specifically would have happened much earlier, and All Might would not have been there, because he is not a factor in all of the hurt Bakugo put Midoriya through, and the stubborn way Midoriya kept working so hard to stand near him. Bakugo's motivation for everything he put Izuku through over the years was the deep discomfort and anger he felt whenever Izuku was near. He didn't want Izuku in his life. He didn't like that Izuku wanted to be on his level. He hated Izuku reaching out when he felt vulnerable, but Izuku kept showing up, and no matter how hard Bakugo pushed back, he wouldn't just disappear, and that's not fair. Izuku's motivation for sticking near, even after the years of abuse, was this need to be closer to someone whose strength and boldness he admired. He didn't care how bad it hurt, because being close to someone who's all the things everyone, including that someone, tells him he can never be, gave him some twisted form of comfort and something within reach to measure himself up to. This was a terrible relationship, but then they punch it out, deal with the aftermath for a few days, and become... I don't think the word civil is right, but they can function around one another now. And that was the narrative function behind the fight. The only reason the fight needed to happen was because Izuku and Bakugo needed to be able to exist in one another's vicinity without falling to pieces. And also because Bakugo needs to know about One for All, so he can back Izuku up for that kind of stuff when no one else can. You can still tell a very interesting story if Bakugo never pulled Midoriya into the training grounds. You can still tell an interesting story if Izuku refused to fight Bakugo because it was finally tired of dealing with him. You can still tell an interesting story if Midoriya and Bakugo never clear the air, but they have to fight, and they have to clear the air, because if they don't, Izuku and Katsuki cannot work together, and they are too important to the future of the story that Horikoshi wants to tell, and the future of their world, to never be able to work with one another. My Hero Academia isn't about the characters as people and how they feel about themselves and the people around them. That's what Horikoshi squeezes in to make everything pop. My Hero Academia is about heroes and everything they are and mean. Okay, we've made a lot of headway. just a few extra things dangling around in here, and we'll be done. So have you ever noticed that Canon Deku is essentially a watered-down version of Fanon Deku? I'm serious, really think about it. If you read an Izuku-centric fanfiction, the writer will usually look into his head in a far more detailed way than we see in the manga. The fan art I see of Izuku has so much variety and potency in the ways he's framed and the expressions he makes, but they still seem like they come from the same place. And I don't just mean because his design is so easily recognizable. There is a weird consistency in the way people think about Izuku. But Horikoshi doesn't use Izuku in his story in a way that would show off all of the almost tangible details of his character. The fandom is making a lot of small, logical connections to give Izuku a kind of punch that he kind of can't have in the manga. This isn't to say Horikoshi is wrong about the way he develops and showcases his own character, but because of what he is trying to do with BNHA, Horikoshi can't do the things with Izuku that the audience does, because if he did, everything about the story would change. That's actually something I love about fandoms and sharing stories. Having other people's eyes and minds on your work makes it truly alive. After all, the art you make and the art people see are not the same thing. There's a marked difference in how I think about and talk about my characters that I've shared with others than the ones I've kept rattling around in my head. Horikoshi clearly put so much love and attention into making each little gear in his story as functional as possible. But he also put a lot of work into making those gears beautifully colorful and turn in captivating ways. I think that's why it feels so different from anything else I've seen. Functional character writing, in my experience, usually produces very structured, very straightforward arcs and twists, while character writing that aims to feel very human has this tendency to swerve and spiral and makes arcs and twists that you need a grip on things to follow. My hero is a kind of controlled chaos, a well-oiled machine that you don't know the use of until it simultaneously brews coffee and changes the color of your curtains. Deku as a protagonist probably doesn't resonate with someone like Nux because from what I can tell, he loves characters as humans writing, so Midoriya's journey through the plot as someone who becomes a hero in order to intimately show the audience what the best heroes are made of doesn't land for him. Deku becoming more powerful through developing who he is as a human is not the point of Hero Aka, and so Deku isn't used as though it is. I'm very happy that Horikoshi writes the way that he writes and uses his characters the way he does, because we would sorely be missing out on something unique if he didn't. And I like studying and learning about how different writers will use their characters differently. Oh, I think that's the bottom of the thought pocket. That one felt a little all over the place, but I'm really happy you stuck around so long. You were very helpful, thanks a lot. I hope you stop by again. Eat something tasty today. I think you deserve it.